Now to Jason, Clare and Scott Morrison, who seem on the face of it to be implacably opposed. One is Home Affairs Minister, who regularly issues press releases decrying the approach to asylum seekers of the other, who is the Shadow Immigration Minister. But the two men are friends, and following the Cronulla riots in 2005, they started taking young people from their electorates on what they call Mateship Treks, walking in the footsteps of Australian soldiers, so far on the Kokoda and Sandakan tracks, learning about each other, about the sacrifice of Australians past, and a little about leadership. They're planning their next trek in 2013, and late yesterday I caught up with them both. Jason, Clare and Scott Morrison, welcome to Capitol Hill.
Thanks very much.
If I could ask you both to you, Scott, first, what was the genesis of the trek? What's the idea behind it?
Well, Jason and I came into the Parliament the same year, and we both came from different communities, which those communities had basically conflicted over the riots that took place in Cronulla and the revenge attacks that followed, and both of us wanted to follow in some of the footsteps of our predecessors who tried to bring these communities together. And the idea of taking young people from both of our communities to go and walk the Kokoda Trail, praise to Jason, he thought it was a great idea and off we went. It was that simple. We'd seen a young fellow who had been involved in those attacks, the young fellow who'd actually torn the flag down at Brighton Le Sands, and the tremendous response of the RSL who basically embraced this guy and sent him on the Kokoda track, and how that changed him. And if it can work for one individual, it can work for us. It can work for everybody. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's right. You know, we became mates here when we became members of Parliament, and the idea was that if two politicians from different sides of the track can be mates, then so can people with different religions and different backgrounds. And so that's why we did it, and it proved extremely successful.
If you could tell us each a little bit about your electorate and why they're so, explain why they're so different.
You want to talk about the Shire? You always want to talk about the Shire. You always want to talk about the Shire.
Look, they're not as different as I think people think, and I think that's one of the things that people learn when they go on the track. But my community is a beachside community. It's a very relaxed community. It's probably not as diverse in terms of its cultural diversity as Jason's. Jason has one of the most diverse electorates in the country, but it's passionate about its sport and its history and its heritage. But the opportunity doing this with Jason is to expose the young people in my electorate to a different community, a different Australian experiences. They're both Australian experiences, but experiences that don't often intersect.
Yeah, and Bankstown's 15 minutes, 20 minutes down the road, but very different. It's one of the poorest electorates in the country. Unemployment is higher in my electorate than anywhere else in the country, bar maybe one or two electorates. Very multicultural. You'd probably have people from 60 different countries speaking as many different languages. Big Arabic population, big Muslim population, big Vietnamese and Chinese population. And I guess that's where the idea came from, that if we can bring kids together, and I brought together 4 Muslim kids from Bankstown, and Scott brought together 4 kids from the 4 different surf clubs of the Shire of Cronulla, and walk the track and see if we can build that relationship. But I guess the interesting thing here was that was idea number one. Bring kids together from different backgrounds and show them that they can be friends, they've got more in common than they realise. But we learned a bit too. We realised that this was not just about that, it was also about learning about Australia's military history, and it was a leadership program. We found ourselves developing this program where we were getting young people and teaching them how to be leaders, and so we've tried to apply that to the trek after that, and we'll keep doing it.
So is that something that evolved after the first trek? You realised that the ideas, the experiences that the kids had could become leadership experiences?
Well, particularly on Kokoda, and it was the same in Sandakan. And once you get on the track, and Jihad Dib, the principal of Punchbowl Boys High, a remarkable individual. But one thing he said after Kokoda was, once you got up there on the track, your past, your nationality, ethnicity, all these things just didn't matter. What mattered was how you were helping each other each day and how you were confronting the stories of that track. And once you're on there, the emotional as well as the physical endurance really had to kick in, because you really were pushed to your limits, and then you're also being confronted on a daily basis with Charlie Lynn telling the stories of what took place at each occasion. I remember one particular night where there were some real great values on display by the young fellas. They went back up the mountain one night when we were coming down. It was wet, it was raining, it was terrible conditions, it was pretty late at night. They went back up the hill up to the mountain to help the girls down and also to take their packs down. Now, that night we got in, we were all exhausted. That next morning we were feeling a bit grumpy, and then Charlie told the story about what happened there. Everyone just forgot it, and it just showed to all of us that you really can put a lot of these things that seem important to us at the time aside and focus on what really matters, because that's what the diggers did. We
learnt the story of one bloke called Bruce Kingsbury at Issarava, one of the most sacred places for Australians, and more Australians are going to visit this place year after year. But Bruce Kingsbury was a real estate agent from Melbourne, became a soldier, was at Issarava, 1942, became a hero. There came a point where the Australians were about to be overrun, and there's some historians who say the implications of that could have been horrific. He grabbed a Bren gun, charged into the Japanese army, pushed about 30 off a cliff and pushed the rest back, leant against a rock to put more ammunition in his weapon, and as he did, he was shot by a single sniper's bullet. Won a posthumous VC, first for an Australian on what was then Australian territory. And Charlie would tell the kids this story in the place where it happened. And then after he finished the track, we went back to Bomana Cemetery in PNG and stood in front of all of the tombstones, and not just Bruce Kingsbury, but all of these men who fought and died for Australia. We stand them all up in a row and ask them to look across this field of tombstones and say, your job now is to live a life worthy of their sacrifice. And it's really powerful, and I think it does change the way these young people think about themselves and what they do when they come back to Australia.
Do you tell them much about the places they're going to before they're there, or is it better to learn about it when they're standing on the same soil? It's
a bit of both. It is a bit of both, and a bit of both for us as well, in terms of how we engage it. But on Dakota, there were those stories in Sandark and the Death March, and retracing that, which we did with Rob Oakeshott as well. That's because right. Rob's grandfather was killed, was murdered at the last camp. But what we did differently on that trek was each of us as trekkers carried a story of one of the POWs who walked. And so very much like hearing the story of Bruce Kingsbury, we would carry the story of one of those
so you're
POWs.
Walking in someone's shoes
in their footsteps. And when
trip.
we got to the spot where that POW died, was killed, and the stories of how they perished and were murdered on that death march was just horrific. And one of the young girls who came from the Shire, she said it was a story I never knew, and now it's a story I'll never forget. And that was another important objective of these treks, that Jason and I have grown up knowing Second World War veterans and First World War veterans. The generation growing up now would not have had that same first-hand opportunity. So these stories have to get passed down generation to generation, old school. And that's what this is doing. So they would get to that spot, they would retell the story, and those were quite sacred moments. Mine was Richie Murray. There are others along the trail.
Tell the Richie Murray story.
Well, Richie Murray was a bloke from Botany, not far from my electorate, the other side of the bay, and he was killed at the first camp at Renau when he owned up to going and stealing some rice at that last camp with one of his mates, Keith Bottrell. Now, Keith Bottrell was one of the 6 who actually got out of the hundreds who were on this death march, and he stood up, took the bullet in the bomb crater where he was killed as a result of owning up to that one incident. But he'd nursed his young mate Keith Bottrell all the way through that trail, and Keith got out at the end of the day. So these stories of mateship, of sacrifice, endurance, courage, the 4 pillars at Kokoda, they're the values we want everyone to embrace, and everyone can. Doesn't matter what ethnicity, religion, doesn't matter.
It's one thing to read about it in a book. It's another thing to actually do it, to walk in the footsteps of either the soldiers that Kokoda or the prisoners of war at the Sandakan Death March. And it's changed us, changed the way we think about our job here in Parliament. It's also made us better friends. You know, when you're walking next to each other, and Scott and I are normally at the back because we're the slowest and the oldest.
He stays with me.
Look after each other. But it changes the kids as well. We've seen big changes in the kids.
And what changes have you seen, and are the effects, is the change long-lasting?
Let me give you just one example, a great example of Liam. Okay. Here's a young bloke who I call a bit of a runaway, a bit of a scallywag that Rob Oakeshott brought along to the Sandakan Death March. And when we got to Singapore, we had dinner, and then I said, you can do whatever you want tonight as long as you're at the bottom of the hotel in the foyer at 5 o'clock in the morning. And so he ran out of the hotel, and I thought, oh, we're going to have trouble with this bloke the whole way along. Day one of the trek, he's always at the front, always trying to get in front of the guide with the machete. He was a really fit young bloke. I think he was an athlete.
Yeah, he was very sporty.
And so he thought it was a competition. It was a physical fitness event. Scott and I came up with the idea on the first night that we'll give a mateship award for the person that goes out of their way to help somebody. On the first night, on the first day of the trek, somebody came back to grab your pack and help you get up the mountain. I think that clicked in Liam's mind too, because after that, he would go back down the track, find somebody that needed help. A lot of the girls had blisters on their feet. He'd help them with their feet, help them get up the mountain. And then when we got back to Singapore about a week later, we went to one of the cemeteries where the Australians who died at Changi are buried. And there was a man and a son kicking a soccer ball around the tombstones. And Liam came over to me and he said, "That's not respect." And I thought, you know, we've changed this young man. He's thinking about these things differently, and that's not because of reading anything in a book or seeing a documentary or us talking about it today. Yeah. He walked in their footsteps. Yeah.
And do you keep in touch with the young people who've been on previous treks?
Well, look, some more than others. They keep in touch with it themselves on Facebook and things like this. And I mean, I obviously still see a lot of the guys around my own electorate, those who haven't taken jobs somewhere else, and it still remains, you know, a very rich experience for them. And I always see them on Anzac Day.
Now you're organising the next trek. It will be next Anzac Day next year. Right, yeah. Where are you going?
We're going to northern PNG to retrace the Battle of Waiata Solomua. Now, this was a battle that took place the following year after Kokoda, and in many ways it's the forgotten Kokoda. And that's what one of the things we want to do with these treks, is try and bring to the attention. There are so many battles. I mean, Kokoda is forever enshrined in Australian history and in our minds and hearts, but there are so many others just like this, and the stories are just as powerful. So there was an assault on Waiata by the Japanese that was resisted, and then the Australians pushed back, and eventually joined by the Americans to take Solomua, and the campaign went on for about 9 months, not unlike Kokoda, and the stories on this campaign are just as stirring. And interestingly, there's an American battalion that was involved in this. It was actually commanded by Teddy Roosevelt's son. And so, look, the stories here are incredible. I mean, one guy, Captain Sherlock, not unlike Bruce Kingsbury. This is a guy who had to hold a position with the Japanese advancing. He stormed a bayonet charge with his crew, turned the battle, held on for an extra 2 days, but was eventually overwhelmed. And the last sight of him was he was standing apparently on one of those log bridges that climbed over plenty of those, just shouting in defiance, and all guns blazing. A real hero.
And how do you pick the young people who go on the trek? Do they pick themselves now?
Well, you know, it's a big, hard thing to do. This trek, I went on Wikipedia, it's described as being fit for only masochists and Israeli paratroopers. So this is hard. So we're going to pick young people who are 18 or over. But because we think it's not just about connecting people from different backgrounds now, it's about leadership. I'm writing to my schools saying, if you've got someone in Year 12 who you think's a future leader, then get them to write a letter to me and say why they should be on the trek. You know, we want, this is a real opportunity for people to put their hand up and say why they should be on it. So 4 young people from my neck of the woods, 4 from the Shire, but we're also hoping to have 4 young people from across the country, 18 or over, to come along on the track.
What leadership skills, traits do young people learn or show? on those trips? Is it what you mentioned, the consideration for others, the respect for history?
Look, it's all of the above, and it evidences itself in different ways with different individuals. We're not necessarily looking for the next president of the student union or something like that. They all have their influence in different ways. I remember one of the things and from the first trek, they were all involved in the surf club. They weren't necessarily captains or anything like that, but their peers respected them. People listened to what they had to say for whatever reason. And so they came back into their community and told the stories
that's right.
of the young people they met from a different part of Sydney. They understood, in this case particularly, their religion a lot better than they had before. Exposed a few myths from both sides, I think. And I mean, that's what happens with young people. They listen to their peers. They don't listen to us, they listen to their peers. And by investing in them, we can't take, if we could, take 1,000 people with us, you would, but you pick people who you just think have got an ability to convey the lessons and to step up, and they always do in so many different ways.
How often do you two speak about organising this trek?
You email me every day.
Been a bit like that. I mean, we're in the planning phase a bit at the moment, so a bit more often, but there is a lot of involvement, and we get a lot of great support, which we should mention. I mean, we get corporate support, support from the clubs, organisations, the RSLs, particularly Bankstown RSL's been great, and got to raise a fair bit of money to do this. We're in the process of setting up a proper foundation to do this, because one of the things we do now, which we learnt in Sandarkan, we raised about over 12,000 for legacy on the first one, in memory of Sergeant Brett Till, who was killed in Afghanistan, was from my electorate. Last time we gave 6,000 or so, I think, was to the girls' boarding house in Sandarkan, and those girls were taken from villages along the track, and we want to do the same thing this time along the villages from Wales Solomore.
Most people would see you as fierce fighters for your sides of politics, and now directly opposed in a portfolio area. They would be maybe surprised that there is this level of cooperation between politicians. Does it happen more than we know?
Yeah, I think people would be surprised, because all you see on television is people fighting with each other. Perhaps what this shows is that you can disagree in the Parliament and you can fight for what you believe in, but it doesn't mean that you can't be friends. What probably surprises a lot of people too is that we agree on a lot of things as well. Even in the Parliament, most of the legislation that goes before the Parliament, both sides of politics agree, but that doesn't make great television, so you normally don't see it. But this is a little bit different because we do this program. And as I said, when you spend a week in someone's company, you do create a strong friendship, and it affects the way we deal with each other too. We'll disagree on things, but it's never personal, and I don't think we'll ever second guess each other's motives.
That is, I think, is a key thing. I mean, we may come from different perspectives on solutions to various things, but I know Jason doesn't sort of doubt my motives. I don't doubt his. I mean, there's a trust in each other's own integrity, and that's what comes from deep relationships in this place. That doesn't mean we're always going to agree, but it does mean that we can respect each other.
Have other MPs come to you wanting to pick up this idea for their own communities?
Not that I can recall. I mean, Stuart Robert would probably want to be attracted by the paratrooper idea and doing that sort of thing. And look, I think some may. I don't know. I think at some stage, hopefully in the distant future, our legs won't carry us on these things, and maybe others will take it up. But I think the idea is a good one.
We want to keep doing it. We're organising 2 treks at once, actually, because we're doing the next trek, the Black Cat Trail, but at the same time we're hoping to take young people to Gallipoli for the centenary in 2015. And I've got a big Turkish community, and so part of that we're hoping is to bring some Turkish Australians back to Gallipoli. We also want to get some sort of Anglo-Celtic Australians, take them to Turkey before the centenary, and let them live in the families of some of the Turkish relatives of some of the Turkish soldiers who fought at Gallipoli, and see that side of the story as well. And because that's such a big event that's going to occupy the attention of the nation, I suspect for the next 3 years, it's going to take us some time to organise that event properly, and we're working with the Australian Turkish community on that now.
What has this experience done for you both? What do you take away from it? And what have you learned maybe about yourselves from it?
Well, there's nothing, I think, that I've probably thrown myself into more, particularly in the physical side of actually doing it at the time, but of which I'm more pleased and I'm more proud of it in terms of what we do together on this. I mean, there are many great privileges you have in being a parliamentarian. The opportunity to do these sorts of things comes as a result of that, so it's a great privilege more than anything else. But the main thing is that you always know when you go through these, it gives you perspective. That's the key thing. I mean, you learn things that you're capable of that you didn't think you were. Emotionally as well as physically, but equally you always have that sense of perspective that you can reflect back on each of those individuals, whether it's Richie Murray on Sandarkin or Bruce Kingsbury or Captain Oakeshott, and yeah,
it's changing people's lives. You really do get to do it. And we talk about it. We all come to Parliament because we want to try and make Australia a better place. You do it little bit by helping people in your office, whether it's writing a letter or making a phone call. But when you take young people out of their comfort zone and you do the trek, you do see the changes that it makes to them, and it makes me feel like I'm doing something real. I'm making a difference. I'm helping people. We talked about this the other day, and I said that as a politician, you're a representative for your community, but here on the track, you really do feel like you're a leader. You're responsible for those 4 young people. Their mum and dads take them to the airport and they say, keep them safe. Yeah. When we did Kokoda, it was only a couple of months after 3 people had died on the track. And we walked past where there were flowers on the track. Yeah. One of my staff who was with me on the track collapsed at the point where someone died. It's real and it's really hard. And we've got, we feel the responsibility of having these kids with us. We've got to bring them home safe. And when you bring them home safe, but you bring them back as better people, you feel like, yeah, we're doing something really good here.
That last day when you're on, whether at Bamana or whether at the memorial at near Renau or where we'll be at Lay on Anzac Day, hopefully next year, it's all worth it. You see it in there. They get it, you get it, and there's a connectivity amongst everybody that is very, very special, and it's all around a future that the Diggers created for us. Doesn't matter what your background is, they gave it to us, and we can all appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Jason, Clare and Scott Morrison, for telling us about the trek.
Thanks, Lyndall.
And that's the program for this week. Parliament will return next week, as will Capitol Hill. Until then, have a safe and relaxing weekend. Good night.
Sean McAuliffe returns